Hyman, the Honky Tonk Professor.
Tonight we present a grand American jazz pianist, one who's done everything in the music. He's played with such greats as Charlie Parker and Lester Young. He's also had a million seller in the hit parade. He's written for Broadway. He's composed film scores for Woody Allen. And all the while he's been acting as a kind of curator of jazz piano history. He's here to lay before you an entire historical conspectus of jazz piano styles. And the name of this honky-tonk professor is Dick Hyman. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell.
Dick, the things that you were doing to that well-known march were really part of the prehistory of jazz itself.
Well, I think so. The origins of ragtime are in this peculiar syncopated rhythm that could be applied to any given melody of the period. For example, with my left hand, if I play the original march, it's the right hand that's ragging it. So that's the nature of ragtime right there.
Most jazz histories are content to start with ragtime, but you, I believe, prefer to go back just a little bit further.
I think you can go back earlier than that because there was an American composer named Louis Gottschalk, and he composed as early as the 1850s using melodies he heard the slaves singing in New Orleans, which is his native place. For example, then he transcribed these things, and they're published and they're available now. One piece of his is called Pasquinade. If I'm not mistaken, it dates from 1855, but if you listen, you will certainly hear some ragtime after I get past the opening theme. So I think that's my case.
Yeah, whichever way you look at it, it's still New Orleans, which is interesting.
Well, that's true, too.
When ragtime proper came in, that was very much based on the march format, wasn't it?
Yes, it was customary to have, as marches do, a little introduction, a first part, a second part, a return to the first part, and then some other section, which is usually known as the trio. And almost all of the great rags were written in that form. For example, Scott Joplin's great 1899 hit, the Maple Leaf Rag, is very much in that form. I'll play a little of that.
you play that with a lot more pep than we've come to expect from, say, Joshua Rifkin. What do you think about the classicizing of rags in the way that he's done it?
Well, I really like what Rifkin told us about. He explained that in his playing that ragtime could be much slower and more contemplative and have more emotion in it. Nevertheless, I think there are a couple of points of thought on that. It's true that Joplin and his pieces notated at the top of them, do not play fast. It is wrong to play ragtime too fast. But nevertheless, we don't quite know what he meant by slow and what he meant by fast, so I take a middle course there.
By now, we must be on the borders of...
What was different about it was the emphasis on the left hand. It took its strides literally from a lower region of the keyboard up to the, like, if ragtime was more compressed like that, a stride is even that much. And another attribute is that the bass tones form a contrapuntal melody on their own. That's, those are some of the important. But each of these devices were the innovations of particular pianists. Some of them very obscure. Some of them didn't record. We don't know much about them except their reputation among the better-known people. For example, they often had exotic names. Jack the Bear was one of them. Another one was the Beetle. A menagerie of piano players existed, and they each contributed one little thing which got circulated.
Yeah, but James P.'s particular protege was by no means obscure.
No. He was more famous than his mentor. Fats Waller was his protege, and he also was a great entertainer on his own in many other ways. Basically, however, he was a stride pianist and one of the very best. I could play one of his things. I could do Viper's Drag.
Great.
Thank you.
That lovely right-hand bit at the end is like his non-tumbling record, isn't it?
Well, that's what I call the waterfall. That's the Fats Waller waterfall music.
Yeah. You can slow it right down on tape and it still sounds perfect. Yeah.
He had wonderful, fine technique.
We should really complete the trio, the three of them wandering around together for a time, weren't there? Three stride pianists.
Well, there was a third member. You're right. It was Willie the Lion Smith. Willie the Lion was another sort of uncle, so to speak, to Fats. And he added certain pretty elements to stride piano, but his piece Fingerbuster is just about as far as you can go technically with this sort of music. So at the risk of busting a finger, I'll give you a little of that. To whom all of the Harlem pianists eventually bowed down was Art Tatum, who really, despite the Lisztian and arabesques and arpeggios and runs of his playing, really was playing stride piano, but very much adorned with all of these other things. I always like to play Fingerbuster before I get to Tatum because it warms me up a little bit for him. But the best I can do is merely an impression. Nobody can play like Art Tatum, then or now. At any rate, this is an impression of Art Tatum's T for Two arrangement.
In and out of 52nd Street as you were, you must have seen quite a lot of Tatum play live.
Well, I did in one period when I was at the beginning of my career, and he was in the full flowering of his. I was lucky enough to be able to play opposite him. I was playing in the dance band at a club called Cafe Society, and he was the featured artist. He was a very nice man, a very great pianist. He was very kind. And they say he could listen by the hour to other pianists just because he said each of them had a story to tell. Nice way of putting it.
Well, we've taken the story of stride piano to a sort of unrepeatable climax. Now, what were the other routes available out of ragtime?
Well, the way I see it, there was another strand, another historical strand, which was several pianists who played more orchestrally, who added to their pianistic technique the sounds of a trombone or trumpet or clarinet of the New Orleans band. And the foremost of these was the Jelly Roll Morton, who you could say was a crossover figure between ragtime and traditional jazz piano. And you could hear trombone in his left hand and sometimes little clarinet figures in his right, and a trumpet at all times. And I think I can illustrate that with a piece of his called Shreveport Stomp, just a little bit. In that fashion, he would play the trombone figure and the trumpet and little of the clarinet there.
But the chordal resolution of what you just played at the end of that second theme is extremely odd, isn't it?
Oh, it took me years to believe that. Yes, it is. It was a... I still don't believe it, but it works. It works.
People are fond of saying that Morton sort of summed up what went before him and didn't really pass anything on. Do you think that's true, or did he influence people?
Well, I think that he influenced Earl Hines. I'm not sure that Earl Hines would have admitted it, but it seemed to me that when Hines played his so-called trumpet style, which was really a pianistic equivalent of Louis Armstrong's playing, that it was quite a bit in the Morton manner. Morton had done something like that. Hines went farther, and he played like Armstrong in this fashion. He mostly played in octaves. And when he wanted to give a pianistic impression of the quaver, of the vibrato of Armstrong, about the only thing you can do on a piano is a little shake like that. So then Hines also added a couple of things which were of interest to his successor, but we'll come to that in a minute. Anyhow, Hines would play his Monday date like... So I think that, it's all right. I think that Hines, in a way, was another one of those pianists who was exploring the jazz equivalents, the pianistic equivalents to orchestral instruments. But he did add, in addition, he added this walking 10th bass, which was very, very quickly assimilated by Teddy Wilson.
Yeah.
And in fact, my understanding of it is that Teddy played very much like Earl Hines at the beginning, but he thinned it down. He would be more interested in playing, let's say, not like a trumpet, but like a clarinet, perhaps, which is why he fit in so beautifully with Benny Goodman in the early combos. Teddy also adapted some of those little break-the-tempo runs that Hines had done, which were in a way setting the stage for Art Tatum a little bit later. So Teddy's elegant playing sounds something like...
Somewhere between Hines and Wilson is what I'd love to play if I had any sort of technique at all. But not only do I not have the technique, I haven't got the hands. You've really got to have a stretch of a tenth, haven't you? So you can do that walking tenth upwards.
Well, it certainly helps to be able to do that, but I don't know if it's the size of the hand so much as the flexion, how much you can stretch out. We could work on your hand a bit. Maybe it's special equipment.
Tread on it, yes, you'll improve it. Now, there's one sort of oddball character before we leave the 20s, and that's Bix Beiderbecke. Does he have anything to do with these surrounding activities?
Well, I think so. Bix Beiderbecke, of course, was better known as a cornetist, but he was a marvelous pianist, and he was a great composer of jazz compositions, which stretched out harmonically in ways that people hadn't been able to think before. In the jazz part of his playing, he, I think, was a little bit like Earl Hines, sort of octaves and walking tenths. Let me play you a piece of his that illustrates both his wonderful harmonic exploration and his jazzy piano style. This is the well-known In a Mist, Bix Beiderbecke.
Were there composers working in that kind of idiom at the time? It has elements of novelty piano about it.
Well, it has, as you say, it has it's rather like the way pianists such as pianist composers like Zez Confrey had been writing. Rube Bloom was another one. A serious American composer named Eastwood Lane was they say, very influential. In fact, Beiderbecke played one of his pieces in a concert. We know by the program that survives. It was a definite school, and I would say that it also very much involved George Gershwin, who in a sense transcended all of this strand of history to do what he did.
Now, we've come all this way, and we haven't heard any blues yet. Now, most of these fellows were capable of playing blues in their own idiom, but actual blues piano would be a separate tradition.
I would say that blues piano is generally known as Boogie Woogie, and what that means is the various basses, ostinato basses, that pianists would play to give a rhythm section beat. Jimmy Yancey had one bass. Pinetop Smith had one, which... But I think the most dramatic of the Boogie Woogie piano pieces is the Honky Tonk Train Blues by Meade Lux Lewis. So I'll give a little... the journey won't be quite as long. It'll be a little bit curtailed. Of course, in its full form, that journey would go on for miles longer than that.
We've been dealing so far exclusively with various forms of solo piano, but now, especially in recording history, various forms of band piano, rhythm section piano, began to become important.
Well, the big event occurred somewhere in the early 1930s when Count Basie, who had been a very fine stride pianist, elected to play in a sort of minimalist style and let the ball be carried, so to speak, by the rest of the rhythm section. Basie by himself would be playing something as sparse as... However, his bass player, Walter Page, was doing something else down here, which I can simulate. And Freddie Green would be playing guitar. Joe Jones would be doing his inimitable cymbal stuff on top of that. It takes several hands to give the complete thing. So I'll just use the left hand for the bass. But Basie would take it easy. No hands.
Well, while we're in band piano, we should look at Ellington then.
Well, Ellington, in my view, was primarily the leader and orchestrator of and composer for his orchestra. His piano playing, although it too began with a very firm education in stride style, his piano playing was more apt to be coloristic. He would embellish, or he would start things off, or he would get a groove going. And one piece of his, called The Clothed Woman, he was very good at titles as well as music. He starts with very dramatic flourishes, but then oddly enough he goes into a Willie the Lion Smith kind of figure. I'll show you what I mean. But so this shows both sides of Ellington. This is an impression of the Clothed Woman. After fooling around like that for a while, however, he went... Then... And in that vein, then he returned to... Ellington's piano style, however, was certainly influential on other pianists, even if it was not his complete interest. He was influential on such as Thelonius Monk, who also did these dramatic seconds and even adapted that whole tone run that Duke Ellington was so fond of. Monk is perhaps better known as a composer of some very basic standards now, but his piano playing was liable to be in this fashion. He would have the bebop open sevenths and a kind of a hard touch and something like this. This is a piece of his self-named called Blue Monk. This sort of playing really, in my view, was brought much farther by Bud Powell, who was the great solo pianist of the bebop times. And Powell succeeded in adapting to the piano all of the catalog of Charlie Parker figures. He too kept a very sparse bass, and remember that we're in the time now when rhythm sections would be accompanying the piano. The piano itself would have kind of minimal use of the left hand, but Bud Powell had a whirlwind style in the right hand that sounded like Charlie Parker. Why bebop is called bebop? Bebop is called bebop because it goes. But after a while, they got tired of calling it bebop. They just call it bop, so it went.
The possibility of that piece you just played was already sort of implicit in Teddy Wilson, I would have thought.
Well, that's right. But if Teddy Wilson was using the vocabulary of an earlier time, his clarinet, his Benny Goodman, his period. Bud Powell was into the inventions, and you have to call them that, of Charlie Parker. Actually, I think that Oscar Peterson, who was such a marvelous player in every sense, one of the things that he does so impressively, and he does many things, is that he took this bebop single line method of playing and incorporated it in his playing, and also he took a couple of other things. He used a couple of other things from his impression of brass sections, like screaming brass, so that he might do.
I know don't go for Peterson 100% because they feel the sort of sense of struggle with the instrument is just missing. The mastery is so complete that it's too relaxed to be involving somehow.
Would that we all had that problem.
Now, away from the single line style, I mean, the opposite of that would be the sort of locked hands business.
Right.
Came in.
Well, George Shearing developed a thing that became his byword. Again, it's unfair to categorize all these players by one item, and yet we have to do that in order to make any sense out of history, I suppose. But George was known for a while. He does different sort of things now. For the blocked chord method he used on such pop songs of the day as September in the Rain, he might do
the piped and canned music people have done him a great disservice by sort of cheapening that style and making it commonplace, haven't they?
Well, it's something that happened as well to Teddy Wilson. His style became universal, and you can hardly hear a cocktail lounge that doesn't have some element of his way of playing. Same thing happened to George's style, which may be one reason that he doesn't do all of that much with it anymore. Has gone on to brilliant playing in other forms. But that inevitably does happen. Mm-hmm. There was one pianist I think we should mention of the modern period, Bill Evans, who, in my view, brought to the music a new contemplative and meditative and somber note. He, as well as a marvelous harmonic application. If he were to play Thelonius Monk's well-known tune "Round Midnight," he might introduce some of this sort of playing.
Yes, there was a sort of rhapsodic element in that, which if you'd played it much more expansively, much louder, and with a lot of grunts, might have been a little bit like Errol Garner in part.
Well, Errol Garner liked to fool you. It's true, he could play that style, the rhapsodic way, for lengths of time. But what he liked to do, and that I always found amusing, was to play a little rhapsodic introduction to something very unexpectedly swinging. For example, he would play... I didn't have to play bass or drums behind Garner, because that lagging right hand would very easily persuade you away from the beat, I think. Well, the key to it is that his left hand never wavered. When he did that, that was where it was at. That's exactly. The right hand could be that much rubato. Yeah. It comes out right, but the rhythm section, always listen to that.
We're getting towards the point now where chord structures and so on are beginning to be dispensed with.
Well, that's right. in a sense, the chords are less important than they were, and it's more the invention and the rhythmic drive on a sequence of harmonies back and forth, kind of rocking back and forth. Keith Jarrett, in some of his fabulous evening-long improvisations, he really improvises without a song in mind and just marvelous from-scratch improvisations. He would possibly get into this sort of thing. Or sometimes a gospel sort of equivalent. But the point is not the elegant chord sequence of, say, Art Tatum, but something else. There's a different game that he's playing. In the hands of McCoy Tyner, the same game is being played, but it's much more rhythmic and much more percussive, and it also has some of the elements of the new vocabulary of John Coltrane. If McCoy were playing. That sort of playing, and
it was Coltrane who used to talk of sheets of sound, but really it applies
that's
to
right.
Tyner more, doesn't it?
That really is, and I had a feeling that Coltrane got some of his approach to the saxophone from the sheets of sound of Art Tatum. Those the incredible running lines that Coltrane got everybody else to explore. Really was the sort of piano runs that Tatum had been doing long before, I think.
Now after that we move really in the direction of a sort of all-out attack on the piano.
I have a feeling you're referring to Cecil Taylor, who is a very, very athletic kind of player. So much so that I can only give the merest wisp of an impression because I get exhausted after about 20 seconds of it. But Taylor can keep up the sort of a punching bag routine for an hour at a time, and it gets fascinating. It has nothing to do with any other kind of jazz, really, except that it seems to have developed from this freedom from chords and freedom from song structure. It has something to do, I suppose, with certain aspects of modern classical music, but it's really his own thing. When he does. The only way I know how to end it is by slamming the keyboard like that. But it's interesting, although exhausting.
Well, Dick, you've brought us all this way to the point where we almost have to turn back there.
Oh.
It's been marvellous and a great treat for the ears. Thank you very much. In all this survey, though, you haven't shown us, and I think if you can remember who you are after all
yes,
that,
who am
you
I?
should. Show us the sound of Dick Hyman himself.
I will put some of these elements together. I'll do a little improvisation on Thad Jones' tune, "A Child is Born."